Good evening, everybody, and welcome. It's so wonderful to have you here on this Wednesday night. And of course, yesterday was exactly 2 years since the last federal election. So it's wonderful timing to have you here tonight to launch Climate 200's Community Accelerator Fund. I'm your MC, Bryony Benjamin. And if you are in a position where you're able to have your cameras on tonight, fantastic. We'd love to see your faces and see the faces of this incredible community working together to help get more wonderful independents elected to the parliament. Just a little note that there may be some journalists in the room tonight, and we love that at Climate 200. We're all for transparency, but just letting you know that this session could be recorded and could end up elsewhere. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I join you tonight from Kumba country on the Gold Coast, and I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And if you'd like to, we'd love you to comment in the chat box what country you're joining us from around the country, because as we know, Climate 200's community comes from 151 electorates, every single electorate in the country all around the place. So we'd love to see who's online and joining us tonight. So tonight, we're going to be hearing from Climate 200's Executive Director, Byron Fay, who will be unpacking Climate 200's three-step strategy for the next federal election. So that's going to be really interesting to hear what's coming and how you can help the next wave of community independence to win. And after that, we're going to have a panel discussion with our incredible guest speakers, who I'm going to introduce now. So we're thrilled to have the incredible Allegra Spender with us tonight. She is, of course, a local business leader, a renewable energy advocate, and the independent member for the Wentworth electorate. And we're twinning tonight in our yellow jackets. So great to have you here, Allegra. And I've got to say, in a personal capacity, I was a volunteer on the campaign, and it was one of the most joyful, fun things I've ever done, which is either a really good reflection on how amazing the campaign is, or a sad reflection on my social life, but I can assure you it was just an incredible campaign to be a part of. And we're also thrilled to have Katarina Gator joining us tonight. Now, she's a community builder and an organiser, and she was really integral to setting up Voices of Goldstein, where, of course, the independent Zoe Daniel ran and won as the independent member there, and won that blue ribbon seat off Tim Wilson. So she was also the field organiser during the election campaign. So she's got a treasure trove of information that we're going to learn from her tonight as well. So firstly, we'll get started by handing over to Byron. For those of you who don't know, Byron is, of course, our Executive Director at Climate 200. He's a former Paris Agreement negotiator. He was an advisor to the independent Senator Tim Storer, where he discovered his love for all things independent politics. And that's where he learned all about the powerful impact independence can have in our parliament. After working on the campaign to remove Donald Trump in 2020, big job, he returned to the helm Climate 200 with Simon during the last federal election, and that incredible, intense and very amazing election that we all know about now. So Byron's going to share what the Community Accelerator program is and how you can get involved. Over to you, Byron.
Thanks a lot, Bryony, and really exciting to be with you all tonight. Thanks for taking the time to join us. So I'm going to talk you through the Community Accelerator Fund, which we're really excited to be launching here tonight with you all. We had a in-person launch in Sydney for those who are able to make it, in Bradfield 2 weeks ago, which is a really exciting event. So it's great to now do it online, and excited to spread the word around the country around this exciting initiative we've got, which really kicks off our effort towards the next federal election. So on the call tonight, we've got a lot of you who know Climate 200 well and have been supporting us for a long time, but there's also some people who are new to what we do. So we'll go back and explain some of the basics for those people so they understand what we're all about. So here at Climate 200, if there was a mantra we had, if there was a quote that represented what we're all about, it's this one from Henry David Thoreau, that there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root. So what do we mean by that? Well, in the lead up to the last federal election, it was quite clear that politics in Australia was broken. Major parties were captured by the fossil fuel industry. Coal magnates were spending millions of dollars to deliver results that benefited their business interests. And as a result, Australia was going backwards when it came to climate. This is one of many international climate policy ratings tables that showed we were really rock bottom of the pack and really going backwards. It wasn't just on climate, however, it was also on integrity. We were going backwards. In this ratings table from Transparency International showing we were falling down the index when it came to corruption. Similarly with gender equity, also becoming less gender equitable in many ways, a bigger gap between men and women in the country. So massive problems on all fronts. With climate in particular, this was despite lots of money being spent on climate-related initiatives, $1.4 billion donated to climate and environment-related causes between 2009 and 2018. So a lot of money going into this. And in 2021 alone, 270 million going to climate and environment causes, but still going backwards on climate policy. That's where Climate 200 came in, founded by Simon Holmes-A-Court with an intention of helping to level the playing field for community independence, committed to three key principles: a science-based response to the climate crisis, restoring integrity to politics, and advancing respect and safety for women. We're a crowdfunding initiative, and many of you on the call are our supporters. To go back to the effort in the lead up to the 2022 federal election, we supported 23 campaigns across the country. A lot of profile given to those that were successful, but there were others who did very well and came close, and we'll return to talk a bit about that later on in the presentation. These campaigns helped kickstart what we thought was a massive democratic revival, around 20,000 volunteers out in the street, door knocking, waving flyers on corner stores. They were making phone calls as well, around 63,000 phone calls, and knocked on 166,000 doors. So a huge effort, volunteer-driven effort. For Climate 200's part, there were four main ways we made contributions to the campaigns we supported. Of course, there's the donations, aggregated donations from our donors and provided them on to the campaigns we supported. We also do analytics. We like to be data-driven in everything we do. We think it's important to be anchored in data. And this helps us to make better decisions with what to do with donor money to make sure we're sending it to a place of high impact, but also helps the campaigns we support make good decisions because they better understand their communities. We also have a capacity building function. One of the things we love about the community independence movement is that most people involved have never been involved in politics before. That's a great strength. On the flip side, it's also a weakness because people need a bit of help in knowing how to compete in this highly professionalized game that is politics these days. Finally, we had a strategic communication function. Many of you would have seen some of our videos and advertising, doing things as simple as educating people as to how things like preferential voting work. And we had a great video that did that with puppies. And many of these independents were successful, obviously one-off preferences. So it's important that people understand how preferences work. In all, we had 11,200 donors to Climate 200. As Bryony said, a third of them from rural and regional areas from all 151 electorates, and collectively we raised $13 million to contribute to the effort. The result of that, well, 6 independents were elected in Zoe Daniel, Sophie Scomps, Allegra Spender, who's here with us tonight, Monique Ryan, Kylie Tink, and Kate Cheney, and one new senator in David Pocock elected to the Senate. We also had 4 existing independents that we contributed to who were re-elected in Andrew Wilkie, Zali Stegel, Helen Haynes, and Rebecca Sharkey, and 4 others that came close, a close second. And this is really important for us to note, because often it takes 2 attempts for independents to break through. So these independents who came second in Bradfield with Nicolette Buller, in Cowper with Kaz Heiss, Alex Dyson in Wannon, and Kate Hook in Calare, really have set those communities up for future success by doing such a good job first time around. We like to start some of our presentations by putting some misconceptions to bed. One of them you might hear around if you watch a bit of Sky News is that Simon Holmes-A-Court, his money was all the Climate 200 money. Well, yes, Simon's very generous and he is the convener of Climate 200, he's putting a lot of effort, but he was just 2% of what we raised in the lead up to the federal election in 2022. So 98% coming from other sources, those other 11,200 donors. You also hear, the independents, the cash up independents. If you look at the amount of money that independents had across the board, there were more independents than we supported. There was about 31 that made a decent effort. They collectively raised, including Climate 200's 13 million, 25 million. So that's it's a lot of money, but compared to the major parties, compared to even the other minor parties in the game, whether it be the Greens or Palmer, Labor, the Coalition, it's really small fry, and it's actually quite remarkable that result was able to be achieved with that amount of money. So what's been achieved since then? Well, on a climate front, it's been really exciting to see some good steps forward. The emissions reduction target increased from 26 to 28% for 2030 to 43%. So a great step forward. Not strong enough, still not science aligned, we don't believe, but a good step in the right direction. And some other good climate changes as well. We've had climate policy developments. Most recently, we've had fuel efficiency standards announced, which will help with the adoption of electric vehicles and other fuel-efficient vehicles, also making it cheaper, more affordable to drive a car as a cost of living relief measure. We've also, on the integrity side, seen the legislation and the operation now of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. Massive achievement. This is an effort that was led by independents as far back as Cathy McGowan, Helen Haynes. Others really flew the flag on this, called for it, and saw the day which it was brought into existence, which is exciting. We've also got the most gender-balanced parliament in Australian history. And for us here at Climate 200, this is very simple. If you want a parliament that's going to actually make policies that represent the community, the parliament has to represent the community, and particularly when it comes to gender equity. So that's an encouraging development, and we're seeing some good things flow from that. But of course, there's more work to do. And we've seen very clearly, it's to us that the coalition is still the biggest threat to climate action in Australia. We've heard the language that's being used by the opposition leader to look to weaponise, particularly renewable energy development, which is critical to the acceleration of our efforts on climate change, reminiscent of the type of language used by Tony Abbott in the past. The National Party, the junior coalition party member, make it very clear where they stand. This is Matt Canavan, Senator from Queensland, taking a lump of coal into Parliament this time last year, repeating an act that was undertaken by Scott Morrison a few years beforehand. The ALP, while definitely an improvement, are no angels, and they've been doubling down in many ways, particularly on the export and expansion of the fossil fuel industry. We've seen this really clearly when it comes to the gas industry, major developments in the Otways, Scarborough, over in West Australia and the Beetaloo Basin, from comments about the climate wars being ended to gas will remain an important source of energy through to 2050. We know the International Energy Agency has said very clearly, and the IPCC have said very clearly, that if we want to have a safe climate, we can't have any more coal, or oil or gas developments. We can have no more. So this is going in the wrong direction. Disappointingly, we've seen it on coal approvals as well, the Labor government approving them at the federal level, and also passing up the opportunity to make much needed changes to our environmental protection laws to allow there to be a consideration of climate change when it comes to approvals of these projects. On integrity, recently, I think we were all shocked to see the whistleblower who exposed the fact that war crimes were committed by Australians overseas put in jail for over 5 years. The first person to be prosecuted for these war crimes, the person who exposed the fact they were committed. So if there's ever was a sign that we have to move forward with integrity still in this country, this for us was a really clear example of it. So this all leads us to the view that if we want more action on these important issues, then we need more independence in Parliament. So how can we help to do that? Well, the first thing we have to think about is when the next election might be, and it's not set in stone. There's a window. Anytime, stay on your chairs, don't fall off between August this year and May next year. So it could be quite soon. So we've got to get organised, got to get our skates on. Here at Climate 200, we have a 3-step strategy, which we're excited to present to you tonight about how we want to support the growth of the community independence movement. The first thing to do is to help the incumbents, the great incumbents who are in, get re-elected. They're obviously doing incredible work, and we're excited to hear from Allegra later about some of the recent activities in Parliament. But clearly, if you want to increase ground, you've got to hold ground, and supporting them to get re-elected is an obvious thing to do. We also shouldn't forget Karen Phelps. She was elected in 2018 in the by-election after Malcolm Turnbull quit politics. She lost in 2019, and so independents are not set in stone when they're there. They have to work really hard, and they obviously come under a really intense competition. And so we've got to remember that and make sure that we work hard to help them get re-elected. The second thing we want to do is help those communities that came close to go again. And we talked about this already in Bradfield, in Cowper, in Wannon, in Calare. These are independents who came second, and they've really laid themselves a foundation for going again and succeeding. If you look back at the history books at those 7 independents who were elected for the first time, all but one of them had independents run the election beforehand. Wasn't them that ran, it was different independents that ran, but they had independents who came in and softened up the territory. These independents who run here in Bradfield, Capital, One, Clare have done the same function. Maybe they'll have another go again and hopefully see it through, or maybe others will pick up the baton and take it from there. But we think there's real opportunity given what we've seen in the history books around these seats. And then the third thing we want to do is support emerging communities to scale their efforts. And this is where there's some real exciting momentum in the community independence movement, which has a lot of legs and is growing day by day. One thing we want to make really clear to everybody on the call, which really sets up why we're talking about our Community Accelerator Fund tonight, is that these campaigns take time. They don't happen overnight. So it takes a long time for the community effort to build, and it's community first, right? It's build it and they will come philosophy. It's not candidate first. And so if you look back at the communities where independents were successful, the community groups, which ultimately were the seeds of the community effort, which generated those campaigns for those independents, they formed an average of 12 to 16 months out from the election. So you might have heard of the independents, right near the election, 6 weeks before the election, something like that. But really the community efforts that set those campaigns in train started 12 to 16 months out. That community group will often go through a community listening process, then a kitchen table conversation process. That's important for understanding what the community actually thinks about, feels, wants. And often people have never been asked that before. They really like that. Those people often volunteer then for those campaigns when they emerge. But also make sure that these independents, when they are selected by their communities, really reflect the values of what the community cares about, which distinguishes them from other candidates, really obviously. Then 6 months out, maybe they'll find their community leader, find someone, normally they'll ask someone who'll say no. I think Allegra's got a story about saying no a few times, having to be convinced. The campaign will then run for sort of 4 to 5 months out, and then there'll be an election. They'll be there for the election, obviously, and hopefully successful. So to punctuate this point, before there was David Pocock, there was ProAct, the community group there in the ACT, doing its community listening, running events, building the tribe, and getting active about this idea of finding a community independent to represent the ACT in the Senate. Before there was Zoe Daniel there in Goldstein, there was Voices of Goldstein doing a similar piece of work. And before there was Sophie Scomps and Michaela, there was Michaela Rising there on the northern beaches of Sydney, where I grew up. Similar stories across the country. Allegra is going to tell us a bit more about the story of the community effort that led to her campaign there in Wentworth. But it's clear this community effort is really important building block for these rock star candidates to step up. And we're often asked this question, how do these star candidates emerge? How do the communities convince them to run? We think there are 3 key ingredients to that. There is firstly the need for an active and growing community groups. They can see that there are volunteers aplenty around for them to support their effort. They're obviously not silly people. They know this is going to take a big volunteer effort. They know that if you're not going to have more money than your opponent, then you need more, volunteers and people to spread your word, spread the word about you as they go about their days. This is where volunteers become really important. They also want to see some funding. They know that it normally takes money to run an election campaign, and normally they want to see the community group having gotten its skates on to raise a bit of money. And then thirdly, they want to see a viable pathway shown in analytics generally, and that's something that Climate 200 often can do. So they're the key ingredients. Enter the Community Accelerator Fund, and we've called it our Accelerator because here at Climate 200, we very clearly don't start campaigns. We're not an incubator. But when a community campaign is developing and showing some minimum standards that it can actually has a chance of going in the right direction, chance of succeeding, then we can help accelerate those efforts by providing some targeted support. So what is the Community Accelerator Fund at a high level? Well, we're trying to raise $1 million to kickstart this effort for the next election, hopefully to support 20 community groups who are at this stage where they're in need of some accelerator funds, up to $50,000 available per community group. What activities will this support? Well, there are a couple we think are really important at this point in time. And the first is supporting community organisers. So there's often community effort that's underway with community volunteers, but often it needs a bit of help, a bit of coaching. And here we've got a photo of Katarina Gator, who you're going to hear from later, who was a community organiser who was supporting that community effort there in Goldsteins, the perfect example of the type of individual who can help to accelerate these nascent community efforts. We also think it's important for these community groups to help build the tribe with events and build their lists with events, grow the movement with events. And so funding to do things like simply advertise their event, book a venue, that sort of thing is important. We also have seen that advertising for a candidate makes use of the great competitive advantage these campaigns have, that they can look at a talent pool, which is the whole electorate. They're not restricted by simply the talent that decides to be a member of the local party. They can literally go to anyone, and making that clear that that opportunity is open to anyone in the community. And so you can get all the incredible talented people the electorate has to offer to put their names forward. Doing that through an ad is a really good way to spread the word. And then finally, systems to manage data and volunteers and set yourself up for success are really important at this early stage. So we think that's worth supporting. As we look to launch this Community Accelerator Fund, this is another dynamic we want to bring to mind to you. And obviously, as we've talked about, we do analytics all the time. And this is something we're seeing quite clearly as a trend that we want to highlight. At a national stage, we're seeing an increasing decline in support for the major parties. You might have heard about this reported. The primary vote is declining, but here's the trajectory down. You can see it very strongly. We're also seeing it, and I'm excited to be able to share some of this with you tonight, in our pollings. This is some of the polling we've done exclusively for informing this strategy. On the left here, you'll see the LNP primary in the seats with the independents were successful. So Kooyong, Curtin, McKellar, Wentworth, Goldstein, North Sydney. And you can see on election day in 2022, that primary vote for the Liberal Party was around the 40% mark, 43 in Kooyong down to 38 in North Sydney. That was the zone in which these independents could be successful. Well, we're really excited to kind of reveal tonight that we are seeing polling in a bunch of seats across the board here, where community independent groups are active, from Moncrief up in the Gold Coast to McPherson, the Gold Coast to Bradfield, in the north part of Sydney to Fairfax in the Sunshine Coast, where the primary vote of the Liberal National Party or Liberal Party is already declining, has already declined down to around that 40% marks. This is a very exciting fundamental in those electorates. It means that independent campaigns that give a third way, a sensible centre alternative to what's being offered at the moment, are very likely to be at least competitive in those seats. So we think the fundamentals are very good. So where do you come in? Well, anyone who's been to our presentations before, you'll see we often put this loaf of bread on the screen because we believe that early money is like yeast, right? This is the way, if you want to have a big impact with your donor dollar on these efforts, if you want to help these nascent campaigns, you want to help them to scale, then do it early. Early money is like yeast. So don't delay, get in there now. Also worth reminding you that every single dollar you donate to Climate 200 goes directly to the campaigns we support. We fundraise for our admin costs separately. Our overheads, our wages comes from donors who've specifically given us money to support those efforts because they want to support us to be able to do this work. It should give you the confidence to know that every single dollar you donate goes directly to the campaigns we seek to support. We do not take a cut on that. So feel free to support with confidence. I wanted to sort of come to sort of close out by reflecting a little bit on this amazing man, David Donaldson, who I think is in the room. I think we might hopefully get him highlighted later, who's joined the Zoom tonight. David's has just recently turned 94, and he approached us with a really interesting, exciting offer. To celebrate his 94th birthday, he wanted to commit in a matching challenge. So every dollar that's donated, he would match it dollar for dollar up to $94,000. So $1,000 for every year he's been on this earth. And so we announced this a few weeks ago in Sydney. We're really excited to launch it. People really loved it. The idea that they could, thanks to David, double their donation to the Community Accelerator Fund. And I'm excited to report here tonight that more than 700 people have contributed, and we've actually already hit the $94,000 matching challenge much sooner than we expected, thanks to the enthusiastic support from everybody. So thank you so much to those who've already contributed. But I will be revealing a little bit later that it's not too late to double your donation. So tonight we can talk a bit about that. But before we get there, also want to give a note to Tim Wilson, who is the Liberal MP in Goldstein, who was beaten, who put out a tweet about David's challenge with a little bit of misinformation to boot. This was, revealed to be misinformation pretty quickly, but it helped give good profile to the matching challenge. Is one of the good reasons that we've we've reached that target. So thank you, Tim, for the support on that campaign. But the party is not over, and thanks to the support from another donor who came along and said, wow, this is amazing what David's doing. I want to put in to continue his matching challenge. You can still double your donation in David's name. So we've had that $94,000 topped up with another $40,000. That gives us an $134,000 goal, matching goal. We're already up to $112,000 of that raise, 84% there. So lots of opportunities still to close that gap with a double donation. So that's really exciting. So please get on board and help us close that gap and make David's 94th birthday really something to celebrate. Before we go, we just want to reflect on donations that we've already been making from the Community Accelerator Fund. So we're seeing some great momentum building across the country, community groups getting active in really diverse places, but two electorates that have had a crack before are also, we think, moving really in the right direction. And Cowper on the north coast of New South Wales is one of them, and Bradfield on the North Shore of Sydney is another. You can see we've listed on the screen the primary vote for the LNP. We've talked about that already, being an important factor in Cowper from 47% in 2019 to 39% in 2022. So we think if that trend is consistent nationally, that's going to be coming down even further. In Bradfield, we've polled recently. It was 45% in 2022. It's now down to 43%. This is before election campaigns even be held. Who knows where it will be when we have the election likely in 2025. So that's exciting and seeing some good community efforts emerging there. To support those community efforts, we've actually made 2 donations already from the Community Accelerator Fund, and happy to announce tonight, $17,000 given from the Community Accelerator Fund to the people in Voices of Cowper to help those efforts of building that community campaign there, and $42,000 given to Nicolette Buller in Bradfield to help with the community campaign that's building really strongly there on the North Shore of Sydney. So it's exciting to actually get some money out the door. For those of you who followed us, you know that in the lead up to the election, we'll try very hard to go broke every week. We try to spend it as quickly as it comes in, and it feels very good to start spending some of this money. So we're excited to continue to do that as we go along. That's it from me, and I'll pass back to Bryony. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Byron. Fantastic to hear all about the Community Accelerator Fund. And can I just say, I want to be David when I grow up. David, what a fantastic way to celebrate your 94th birthday. And he is on the call today. So if you go to gallery mode, you might be able to spy him, the celebrity amongst us tonight. A huge thanks for that incredibly generous donation, David. All right, so we the numbers just keep jumping up on this call. We've now got 428 people in the room, so fantastic to have you all here. For those who weren't here at the start, I will just recap. We've just launched the Community Accelerator Fund, and we are joined by special guests tonight, the independent member for Wentworth, the wonderful Allegra Spender, and Katarina Gator, who is a community organiser. And I'm going to get them both spotlighted now and come up and join me on the virtual stage here. Hi, Katarina, I can see you. And we've got Allegra in a fabulous yellow blazer also tonight, Allegra. So welcome, wonderful to have you both here. And we might kick off, Katarina, with you. So for people on the call that actually might not know what community organising is, I'd love to hear a bit about what it actually is. So you were, as I mentioned earlier on the call, very pivotal in setting up Voices of Goldstein. And I believe that Goldstein was the only seat where an independent ran and won, where they hadn't run at the last election. And that was in large part due to the incredible community organising effort that took place there. So, yeah, can you share a bit about what it is and what did you do there?
Thank you. And I do want to acknowledge that it certainly wasn't all me. There was an amazing team of people, and I know some of them are on the call today. So hello, everyone from Goldstein. But I think having the time to actually work on it really helped, and I'll get into that in a minute. But so community organiser, it's not a well-known career, but it is one. Barack Obama was a community organiser, which always makes me feel much more legitimate. But a community organiser is a form of campaigner who really works on the ground with people. So they usually work in a community where there's a community that wants to make a change. So it might be a workplace that wants better conditions. It might be a community that doesn't want a development in their town or their suburb. In this case, it was a community that wanted a different representation at a federal level. And really they go in and they find the leaders, the people who are really have the passion and what it takes to make that happen, introduces them to one another if they don't know one another already, and then helps them develop strategy, helps them with training and any support they need to actually win that campaign. Would you like me to go on?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. And then, we'd just love some insights into when you and the other people, of course, I know you are incredible, but it wasn't a one-woman effort, what you were doing in the lead up to that election and how far out?
Yeah, sure. So we actually first met, I think it was September or October 2020, just towards the end of the first very long lockdown. David Rothfield, if he's out there today, I think called us all together. There were about 30 people in the room at that time, and about 7 of us put up our hand to see if we could make something happen. Took us a little while to get going, but I think we launched our organisation with an event. I think John Hewson, I saw in the crowd in the room tonight, was our first guest speaker, and Sue Barrett, who's also here, was interviewing him, and we had about 100 people at that event in February. And from there, we were able to grow our team of supporters and volunteers by doing, I think we did monthly events. We did every weekend, we were out in the street handing out flyers, wearing very daggy T-shirts that said, I think our Independence Day is coming, or something just as cheesy. And we had a great Facebook group that built a lot of momentum. But I think by the time we found Zoe, or by the time she said yes, we had about 1,000 people on our database. And we'd raised about $120,000 to get going.
Wow. So an incredible landing pad for a rock star candidate to appear, but also to have the confidence that this was going to work. Yeah, incredible. Yep. All right. So Allegra, welcome. We have it coming over to you now. It was a bit of a different scenario. There was a Voices of group in Wentworth, but it was worked quite differently. Can you tell us a bit about what was going down in Wentworth long before you had come across it?
Sure. So there was a group called Voices of Wentworth in Wentworth, but they were taking a very non-partisan view. They were frustrated by politics, but they wanted to lift the debate. And so what they had been doing was doing a series of debate and events, which are really about getting people together to talk about major issues. And so I think that helped people sort of, think about these issues and question, the way they were being handled. But they never sort of, they never endorsed any candidates. They held debates and sort of really were at arm's length. In terms of how, Wentworth really got off the ground, I think, a bunch of, a small group of people at the start, got together and particularly I think looked at what Zali had done in Warringah and said, we should do that here because we are so frustrated in terms of the quality of our representation. So it did start, I think, with, a small, literally a group of people coming together at someone's house, 5 or 6 people, I think mainly women, and then really built from there. And to, then by the time they had started to, when they approached me, I think they'd already had sort of 50, they were doing events with sort of 50 people and stuff like that. So they had built actually quite a lot of momentum before I got involved. And, for me, I've got to say the benefits of having that sort of community grassroots piece means that, as coming in as a candidate, it's really intimidating, to say, I want to put up my hand and run for Parliament, it's really overwhelming as a choice. And so already having some people who are saying, look, we are seeking someone to do this and, we will support and you could have a discussion with, really made that decision much easier for me, to be honest, because I was giving up, a job I loved, I have kids, I had to give them my Italian passport. So there's quite a lot of, it was quite hard to make the decision to run. But that certainly made it sort of much more, it's much more just less lonely, because I think when I was actually running, the reason why I think the reason why I won, but also the reason why it was actually such a joyful time was actually the people who got galvanized behind this. I remember we had our first event where I did a launch speech. We had like over 400 people there. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe there are that many people out there in Wentworth who are equally frustrated that, you know, we're not being represented on climate. You know, we're not being represented in the sort of kindness and decency in which how we treat people. You know, refugee policy, for example, was a really important issue for Wentworth. But one of the first things that Dave Sharma did as the new, you know, member for Wentworth after he displaced Karen Phelps, who was an independent but only for 8 months, was he voted to overturn what Karen Phelps had done, which is ensure that critically ill asylum seekers could get off Nauru. And he voted first with his party, not with the community, who actually felt very strongly about refugees and still does. And also, you know, there was a real sense in my community as well, you know, that actually the quality of decisions, you know, the quality of economic management, the quality of, you know, policies that support businesses were also not up to scratch either. So there was this real frustration there, but also I think for a lot of people an inevitability that, you know, we didn't have a choice. And I think, you know, I'm an economist originally. You know, I believe that competition drives better outcomes. And what I hear now from all parliamentarians across the spectrum is there's no such thing as a safe seat. And I think that it's good regardless of who ultimately gets in, because if you've got someone breathing down your neck, who you know, if you're not doing the right job, you will be held accountable against. You know, you up your game. You represent your community more strongly. You actually care more what the community thinks, because it's no longer a free pass to a cabinet position, which is some of these big safe seats have been seen at in the past. It is really that opportunity, you know, to get real representation and to get a voice that is really connected to the community that you're from.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And Allegra, I think I'm right in saying that you said no once, twice, many times. I don't know how many it was total. What was that turning point for you? And what was your process? Did you write a pros and cons list? Did you know, what was the process to go, okay?
Yeah, it was hard. It's a really hard decision. And part of it's also, as I said, it's also an intimidating decision to make. But I think, you know, I talked to people I really respected. John Daly, actually, who's someone I knew who used to be the CEO of the Grattan Institute. And I said, I called him and I said, look, John, crazy idea. And he's like, I'm just writing a report literally on why we don't get strong economic reform. And one of the potential ways through this, and it's about independence, is being a major lever. So that was a really big turning point. So it was partly talking to people I really respected. That really helped, I think, both build the confidence that this was the right thing to do, and also that I had a chance. I mean, you never know how you're going to do, but I just decided it was just too important an issue and too important an election not to stand up in. And I think for me, you know, probably the nail in the coffin was really the COP, it was COP26, I think, at the time. When it became just up at that time, it became extremely clear that, you know, Scott Morrison was not going to update Australia's ambition. We were going to take 26 to 28% to the COP as our 2030 target in terms of emission reduction. And it, you know, just has no basis in the science. It's not economically responsible either. And, you know, you had the BCA, for instance, the Business Council of Australia saying, yeah, we think it should be, you know, 46 to 50%. And then you have the government saying, no, 26 to 28 suits us just right. And so that piece really was kind of the nail in the coffin for me. And I said, look, you know, this is just, it's worth doing whatever happens. It's because, you know, if you don't stand up, people will continue to make decisions that you don't agree with. It is only by standing up and getting organised and, you know, getting over, I think, 1,400 volunteers that we got, that we could truly make a difference on this.
Wow, extraordinary. Well, a huge sacrifice, as you say. I mean, giving up an Italian passport for starters. I mean,
it's not. I know it sounds like a wish, but you do.
No, I mean it. I think that's a big sacrifice. But you know, with all the other considerations aside, just an extraordinary decision, and we're so grateful that you did make that big decision to run. But can you, for people listening that maybe weren't in the electorate at that time, that were around the country, can you just take us back to a bit about how it felt in Wentworth during that campaign. I mean, you said you have 1,400 volunteers. That is enormous.
Yeah.
Lots of dogs as well. Lots of dogs with dog merch on.
Yeah, exactly right.
And I'm pretty sure you might have been cloning yourself, because you were at like 17 events a day. It was extraordinary. But yeah, just paint a bit of that color of the campaign and what it was like.
It was an enormous amount of fun, actually. That's the thing. There was joy. And I think for me personally, it was actually connecting with all these different people. And I met so many volunteers. Most of the volunteers, I didn't know before. And I had a lot of volunteers who said, look, I didn't realize there were that many people in my community who felt the same as I did. And, I still have people, so many of our volunteers, many of whom we're still very closely in touch with. We worked very closely with on the Voice campaign, and, who volunteer in the office and other places. They would tell me that they're going out to lunch with their friends, and, we still do volunteer events where everybody gets together. So it's built a real community of people who care, and who feel very empowered. And I think that empowerment has, come into other areas where people are saying, okay, right, well, we did that. Well, how else can we make the changes that we want to see in our community? And so I think that is really wonderful, sort of young, old, real mix of people, real mix of perspectives. A highlight for me would be probably we've got a very one sort of big road in particular where a lot of cars drive in and out of. And so we did a couple of times a sort of big sort of sign waving with lots of people with pictures of me, which is very weird to have lots of people, jiggling pictures of you. But we probably had, I think probably it might have been like 500 meters, 600 meters, hundreds of people flagging with these signs. And, one of the big thoroughfares where, thousands of cars are driving in. So that was probably the most fun. But it was just so many different things. As you said, we had dog bandanas, we had swimming caps because, we've got Bondi and Bronte and Tamarama and Clovelly in the electorate. So it's, we had lots of fun, actually. There was a lot of joy there.
And joy and fun are two words that you don't often associate with politics, but they are the two words that come up time and time again when you speak with independents. And I know I made friends volunteering on your campaign
exactly.
the rest of my life that I work with still. And, so it really is. And I think it becomes that fabric, doesn't it, of a campaign that makes it so strong. It's hard to compete against joy and fun. Katerina, coming back to you. So I remember you saying to me that you had quite a clever strategy in that with that, the fundraising you were doing before the candidate, you had found the candidate. You were saying to people about pledging a donation, but they didn't have to give it until the candidate was unveiled. So it was sort of this thing where they could be a part of it, but they didn't have to put their money on the line until, they liked the candidate and saw who it was. Can you talk us a bit from, I believe as well, Zoe was another one of these reluctant, wonderful candidates who said no many, many times. What was the process there of Zoe saying yes and coming on board, but also what was some of the, from your organising perspective, what were some of the ingredients that really made it a superstar campaign that kept people attracting them in and kept them coming back for more?
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, there are a few questions there. I might start with the last one about sort of, I guess, getting people in. And it definitely, that sense of joy and community, I think for sure is a key ingredient. What we did in our campaign was every time we did an event or we went out in the street and we collected people's names, we always made sure we got their phone number as well. And we had a fantastic team. I don't think Carolyn's here tonight or Ross, but they led a team of what we called welcome callers. So every person who signed up to the campaign, starting with the people who said they volunteer, but we tried to get through everyone, would get a call from a volunteer, which really built relationships. It really helped us identify people who could step up and do other roles as well. But it really, I think, created a connection to the campaign from the very beginning. And as you say, so many of our volunteers made lifelong friends on the campaign. I certainly did. That sense of community and joy, I think, was definitely a key element in attracting people. But then also just being really strategic about it, just making sure that we did an event every month, that we thought about speakers that would attract people that were the right sort of people that we wanted to have on board, so that when we had a candidate, they had confidence in us. We were very clear about trying to be multi-partisan. So We started off sort of with a small group of people, but by the end, I think we had people who voted, every type of, the major parties, but smaller independents and smaller parties as well. We made sure that they were we had a representation from all the major parties on our candidate selection committee, so that it was really multi-partisan. Really tried to be strategic about the events we did and then how we followed up with people and brought them in afterwards. I think that really worked. So that was that. And then I think you also asked about our pledge campaign. So one of the things I don't think I mentioned before was that when I started on the campaign as a volunteer, but I think sort of by the time we launched in February, I had enough experience on campaigns previously to know how much work would be involved in trying to build the numbers that we needed to attract a candidate of the calibre we wanted. And I knew that we just didn't have on our campaign people who had that amount of time to give. I also knew we had a member who had an inheritance that he had said he would commit to a candidate should we find the right one. So I convinced the group, instead of putting that money towards a candidate, to pay me to work on the campaign to get those numbers going. And so I guess I then felt a lot of responsibility to make sure we made that money back. And I promised them we would. And so what we did is we went out to the community. I think we'd actually started before we found Zoe. It was a pledge campaign, so we didn't think it was fair to ask people to donate to a candidate that didn't exist, but we asked them to pledge what they would donate if we found their ideal candidate. And we set that up using Nation Builder, which was the program we were using, and we raised $120,000 in pledges before Zoe announced. So we were able to call those in, and I think people ended up not only giving the money they pledged, but giving more when they realised what a great candidate we had.
I love that. That's a really clever strategy. How much would you donate if your ideal candidate was found, not just when we find a candidate? Yeah, an important point of distinction. Allegra, back to you. Since you've been a parliamentarian now, we've just celebrated your 2-year anniversary in the Parliament, as we were saying. I'm really interested to hear from you about the impact that you think you and the other independents have had in the Parliament since being elected, and specifically I'd love to know what you're most proud of in terms of the things that you individually and on the crossbench have been able to achieve.
Thanks, Bryony. I think, in my community, I spoke to this guy who said, I said, what's important to you? His name was Sean, this is in Bondi. And he said, look, I care about 3 things. He said, I care about the environment. I live in a beautiful place. I want to look after it. He said, I want us to be kind to people. I want us to treat people decently. And he said, and I'm a small business owner, and that's really important to me. And so those are kind of 3 things I think that have been particularly strong for me in Wentworth, but also I think there are sort of some parallels in other parts of the community as well. In terms of climate, obviously that was a major focus, and I think the ship, really has turned around. And I think what the independents have done here is we've strengthened the government's policy. So on things like the safeguard mechanism, which deals with, the worst of industrial polluters, on things like, into pushing to get a water trigger in, which is really critical for, as an environmental protection in terms of assessing new sort of projects in terms of its environmental impact. But we've also given the government, we've really pushed the government to have more courage on important areas. And fuel efficiency for me is a perfect example. Going into the last election, Labor did not touch fuel efficiency. They said, basically, no, we're not going to do anything in this space. Myself and, I think most of the other certainly the people who were elected all said, we are insane if we don't bring in fuel efficiency standards. It's going to be us and Russia out of the developed world who don't have fuel efficiency standards. And that is actually costing us from an environmental point of view, but it's also costing us in terms of how much it costs us to run our cars. And so that's an example where I think we really push the government. I remember my first meeting with Chris Bowen is to say, you can do this, we should do this. And so really strong public and private advocacy means that the government has literally just passed that in last week. So, it's those sorts of things are pieces that, you do the public piece, you do the private piece, and it's about strengthening agenda as well as setting agendas. Other examples, again, on, for instance, women, one of the reasons I stood very much was because I can't stand that fact that I'm going to have a dig at the coalition here. They have had they had about 23% women in the lower house back in 1996 when I finished school. They have never had more than 25% women in the lower house forever, including the last, 25 years. And at the moment, I think there are 20% women in the lower house. There are 11 women on the coalition House of Reps. There are 11 women, and out of 55, I think it is, there are 11 women on the crossbench, and we're 17. I mean, like, if you're looking at what's happened in terms of gender equity, you can just see that in that. But, things like paid parental leave, I've been a really big advocate of trying to expand the amount of time that partners, particularly, typically fathers, but not always fathers, take in terms of sharing the caring, because if we get more men sharing the caring, we're going to improve actually women's economic empowerment. Again, that was not something the Labor Party took to the election, but it's something that myself and others championed, and they have moved to increase paid parental leave, including increasing the amount for the second parents that is sort of use it or lose it. Ditto on things like superannuation payments on paid parental leave. So again, you don't get everything you want, but if you keep on pushing, you really achieve things. I think a big one that the crossbench achieved was obviously the NAC that Helen Haynes has been pursuing, relentlessly, and she really created the opportunity to do that. And things like HEX relief, for so many of our young people were facing this huge growth in their HEX bills because of high inflation. And again, Monique Ryan really has been pushing that along with the whole crossbench, and we just saw the government take action in the budget. For me, probably one of my hobby horses particularly has been tax, because both major parties took, zero tax policy to the last election. And as I just feel that tax is too important from an intergenerational point of view, it's too important from a productivity point of view, and it's too important from a climate point of view to be ignored. And so that's really been my push. And now we're starting to see even the coalition say, okay, they're going to start to bring tax policy onto the table. So sometimes it's about strengthening the policy the government's got, sometimes it's about, building new areas of policy or giving them the courage to do more. And sometimes it's putting different issues on the table and saying, you've got to deal with this. We're sick of waiting. So it's a bit of a mix, but it's been a pretty incredible 2 years, I have to say.
I'm sure it feels like a lot more than 2 years, Allegra, because you have been busy. And as you say, the ability for independents to be able to put things on the table that the major parties just won't touch. I famously heard when Catherine Gowan and Helen Haynes had been campaigning, for the Anti-Corruption Commission for a long time, they were just told absolutely never going to happen. There's no way. And look where we are now, thanks to the efforts of the crossbench.
I jump in there. I just want to say, firstly, this is, it takes success has many mothers or fathers. And so, I think the truth is that there are lots of community groups, there are lots of other pieces, but the power of having people in the parliament doing this, it strengthens, the communities. Community's hands, because if the community, has effectively says, we care about online gambling reform, but the major parties effectively have a cartel around, we're not going to touch certain things because it actually suits both of us not to touch this. And you will see that in corruption. You will see that in, things like gambling reform. You will see that in terms of accountability and transparency. It's actually having sort of independence and a crossbench that is active that can actually break open that cartel and to sort of say, look, we as a community do not think that's good enough. And it's a sort of added leverage to get that community's expectations in the parliament when it doesn't suit the major parties, because, in so many things they'd prefer you to act. They prefer to sort of get on with their way of doing things, and the rest of the community basically to sort of accept it.
Absolutely. And Allegra, I've heard you talk about how question time is even more shocking in real life when you're there, and that actually it's often when it goes to the crossbench for a question. So the opposition asks questions, they're just trying to point score. The government are asking questions of themselves, and then it comes to the crossbench who are actually asking questions that they might want to hear an answer to, and the parliament goes quite quite silent, and people are listening as some anecdotes I've heard. So yeah, it sounds like
I think that's because I think, when I speak to people in my community, most people say they don't like the politics of politics. They don't like the name calling. They don't like the wedging. They want evidence-based policy that is, that is practical and that actually deals with what people worry about. And it's the name calling and the kind of, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. People are over that. They just want to say, look, how do we fix this? That's the piece I think that, the community says to me. And I guess that's what I'm trying to do, and always imperfectly, I'm trying to do in the parliament.
Yeah, fantastic. And Allegra, before we move on to a final question, I just did want to ask for your take. I know many people on the call tonight, many of us are feeling frustrated and disappointed with Labor's recent announcement that it plans to back gas to 2050 and beyond. Just keen to hear your take on that announcement.
Oh, look, I was really disappointed. And, I think this is an area where the major parties do have a cartel when it comes to gas. And, I think, watching the resources minister sort of say, we absolutely need this for our own sort of energy security. When you look at the East Coast gas market, which is East Coast electricity market, which is the one that everyone worries about, less than 5% of our electricity market on the East Coast is supplied by gas. So gas is not the major driver of our electricity, of electricity in the East Coast. It's there for peaking. And of course, I accept and I'm very clear that obviously we will need, gas for peaking and other parts as we transition to renewables. But our focus should be saying, look, gas is a necessary evil. How do you minimize the gas that we need? How do we work with our partners, to speed the transition as much as we can, rather than say, hey, let's bet the house on really expanding that and really promoting that. So that was hugely disappointing, because I do believe, where they've ended up is where they're pretty similar gas policy to the coalition. And I've got to say, I was very surprised about that, but I think it really comes down to WA and the seats that are in play there, and that's really what's going on here. It's politics. It's not actually about climate science.
Yeah, great to hear your perspective. Thank you for sharing it. Well, we are less than a year out from an election. We're not quite sure, obviously, when it will be. But I would just love to, we'll start with you, Katerina, and then to Allegra. For people that are on the call tonight listening that might be in communities that are thinking about getting started or maybe are underway, what's something that you'd leave them with, a message or a piece of advice as they get underway and get started?
Sure. So I'd say just get out there as much as possible. Do events, get out in the street, get out as much as possible, and make sure you get people's phone numbers. Those welcome calls are just invaluable. I think they were one of the best things we did. And I'm always happy. I'm on LinkedIn if you want to find me and ask me any questions. I'm always happy to be bailed up and asked anything you want. And I'd also say to anyone who's thinking of supporting the Accelerator Fund, I guess the reason I agreed to be on here tonight was because I know what a difference it made to us to have, we were lucky to have our own little Accelerator Fund that allowed me to give up my work and work on the campaign full time and get things going. And that early money is definitely goes much, much further than later on. So if you're thinking of supporting it, I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah, now's the time. And Allegra. Words to people all around the country that are thinking.
Look, I think I'd say firstly it can be joyful, and it really should be, and it's a huge. I think it's a really wonderful moment actually. I think in terms of having a bit of a core crew that are really committed helps to kind of build. So you can sort of, we always did sort of hub and spokes kind of where we had kind of people from different, we broke up the electorate into different areas and kind of said, okay, if you're from this Paddington area, you'll know people in Paddington, you can build a community around that. So having a thinking about, where are kind of the hubs in your community and where do people come from, but having that core crew that you sort of come back to, because some people want to do a lot and some people will only want to do a little bit. I think the listening piece is absolutely critical. And just, trying to, Kathy McGowan did the kitchen table conversations. It's really up to each community how else you do that. But trying to do as much listening and learning. and getting understanding of what matters to people. It's a different time now, but, you just got to, if you understand what matters, then, I think it will help in terms of like picking, finding a candidate who's right. And also then just being connected into what people actually want. So I think that is, it's really, really critical. And I love Katarina's piece about welcoming people with a phone. I think that was really good. With my campaign, they had actually this small group of people had already made some commitments to funding. They had already started to do this actually, with that, group of 20, 30, 40 people, again, before there was a candidate, who said, look, these are people who wanted to back this, all these people from Wentworth. I'm not even, don't think Climate 200, I'm not sure if it's around yet, or, but it was way so before that, who really got together and said, look, let's put that money together. So I think, again, I do think early money makes a real big difference.
Oh, fantastic. Well, brilliant insights from you both. And wonderful to hear about all the work went on, Katarina, in Goldstein, because you really obviously set the foundations there for an incredible campaign with the team you were working with. And Allegra, just, such a joyful, fun campaign. And it's so wonderful to know that it can be, I just wanted to shout out to Pam in the chat, who he's just donated, and she shared it with 6 different climate groups. Go Pam, what a legend. And to everyone who joined us tonight around the country. And I am just going to pass back to Byron, who is going to do a wind up. Allegra and Katarina, thank you so much for joining us on the panel.
Thanks, Bryony. Thanks, Allegra. Thanks, Katarina. Wow, what an awesome discussion. I'm going to be short with wrapping up, but here in the Climate 200 community, we're all here because of impact, right? That's what we're trying to do here, is have the biggest possible impact we can. We're here because we care about specific things we think need to be improved in our country. And for the Climate 200 community, climate, integrity, gender equity are those 3 things that bring us together. Simon Homescourt, who sends his regards, who sadly couldn't join us tonight, often talks about this metaphor when it comes to discussion of impact, which is that of a trim tab. And for those of you who don't know what a trim tab is, I certainly didn't before Simon had talked about this. The trim tab is this tiny little rudder on the end of a rudder of a ship. So if you imagine you've got a big ship, you're trying to turn it. Well, the challenges you've got so much pressure when that ship's going through the water that it's really hard to turn a big rudder, almost impossible. But what you can do is you can turn a really small sort of sub rudder at the end that they call a trim tab. It's a really small version of it. That's enough. You can, with enough force, turn that. If you can turn that, it then eventually gives you enough latitude to turn the rudder itself, which eventually will turn the whole boat. And that's what here at Climate 200 we're trying to do. We're trying to apply that bit of pressure at the right spot in the system to allow for a much bigger, much outsized impact for the effort that we're putting in. And we've seen it already. The proof is in the pudding. These incredible community independents. We've supported them along with thousands of other people around the country have come behind them in a big community effort to help them get elected and to support them to run really competitive campaigns. And so we're excited to still be in this game, and with your support, we can get there. One final thing I'll leave you with, just a reflection on what we're seeing in the national polls. So we talked a bit about before how we're seeing the major party primary vote declining very clearly. But one thing we think is happening is that actually the extent to which that makes the major party candidates vulnerable in these seats is hidden, because it's generally a 2-party game, right? So even if both major parties' primaries are declining, because we have a preferential voting system, the votes ultimately, if it's just those 2 major parties who are there as the 2 in competition, they flow back, the votes flow back, and you still get a similar 2-party preferred vote. And that's why you can see, even though the major party vote at a federal level is declining, the 2-party preferred vote for Liberal Labor stays about the same. We think here at Climate 200, actually, that's hiding the real vulnerability of some of these candidates, major party candidates, because they're not reflecting their community, and it's shown by the fact that primary is declining year on year. That's a huge opportunity. It shows that there is a real yearning out there for an alternative. And as we saw at the last federal election, communities around the country stood up, backed community candidates who had really good ideas, who reflected the values of those communities. They were in the sensible centre, and the community rewarded that with a win in many instances. And so we think that's what's happening here. and we're excited to support these campaigns going forward. So thank you so much for joining us. We really want to be the trim tab with you. So hopefully you'll get on board with our Community Accelerator Fund and help us to turbocharge these great community campaigns that are emerging around the country. Thanks for your time, everybody. Have a good night.